My brother faked a work emergency to ruin his wife's trip. I covered for the kids and confronted him. Now she's quietly planning to leave and he has no idea the clock is ticking. Let me be honest with you from the very start. I never wanted to get involved. I am the kind of person who genuinely believes that what happens between a husband and wife is their business and their business alone. I was raised that way. Keep your nose clean, mind your lane, don't poke around in other people's marriages. My mother drilled that into me from the time I was old enough to understand what marriage even was. And for most of my adult life, I lived by that rule without question, but there are moments, rare gut-twisting moments, when staying silent stops being neutral and starts being complicit. When you witness something so deliberately cruel, so coldly calculated, that looking the other way makes you a participant in the damage. That's where I found myself 8 months ago. And everything that happened after that one Friday afternoon has permanently changed the way I see my brother, the way I see his wife, and honestly, the way I see myself. My brother's name is Daniel. He's 3 years older than me, and for most of our lives, we were close, the way siblings are when they grow up in a small house with not a lot of money and have no choice but to lean on each other. We shared a room until I was 13. We covered for each other. We had each other's backs through rough teenage years, through our parents' messy divorce, through the kind of turbulence that either breaks siblings apart or welds them together permanently. We were the welded together kind. At least, I thought we were. Daniel met his wife, Claire, about 9 years ago. I liked her immediately. That's not something I say lightly because, truthfully, I'm not an easy person to win over. Claire was warm without being performative about it. She was funny in that dry, quiet way where you don't realize she made a joke until 30 seconds later and then you laugh out loud alone in your car on the drive home. She was sharp and kind, and she loved my brother in a way that was so obvious and so sincere that it almost made me uncomfortable to watch, like witnessing something too private and too real for an audience. They got married after 3 years together. Had 2 kids, a boy named Oscar who just turned 7, and a girl named Lily who is 5, and from the outside, their life looked like exactly what everyone hopes their life will look like, the cracks. I learned later had been there for a while, but I didn't see them because I wasn't looking. I had my own life, my own apartment 40 minutes away, my own relationship that had ended badly the year before and left me in that foggy, self-absorbed recovery period where you're mostly just trying to get yourself upright again. I wasn't paying close attention to Daniel and Claire's marriage. I should have been. The trip was Claire's idea, and from what she told me when she first mentioned it, it had taken her almost 2 years to work up to planning it. That detail alone tells you something important about her state of mind by that point. That something as simple as a trip with friends required too. Years of internal negotiation before she felt entitled to actually do it. She and 2 of her closest friends from college, women she'd stayed close with across 15 years and 2 time zones, had planned a long weekend in Portugal. 4 days, just the 3 of them. No kids, no husbands, no obligations. The trip was scheduled for the first weekend in September. She told me about it over coffee at my apartment about 6 weeks before they were supposed to leave. Her eyes were different when she talked about it, lighter somehow, like a window had been opened in a room that had been closed up for too long. She said she hadn't had 4 days to herself since Lily was born. She said her friends were flying in from different cities just to make it happen. She had already booked the flights. She had already found a small hotel near the waterfront in Lisbon that she'd been researching for months. I told her it sounded incredible. I told her she absolutely deserved it. I meant both of those things. What I didn't know, what I only found out much later, was that Daniel had never been fully on board. He'd said yes. He nodded and smiled and let her make all the plans, let her book the flights and the hotel and the excursions, let her spend months looking forward to something. But according to Claire, every time the trip came up, there was a comment. Something small, something deniable. I just hope work doesn't get crazy that week. It's a busy season, you know. We'll have to see how things look closer to the date. The kind of comments that don't sound like sabotage and isolation, but that, strung together over weeks and months, create a constant low hum of anxiety around something that should have been simple and joyful 2 weeks before the trip. Daniel asked me if I could be on standby to help with the kids while Claire was away. He said he might have a project deadline that weekend. I said, of course, I love Oscar and Lily. Watching them for a weekend sounded genuinely fun to me. I didn't read anything into the request. I thought he was just being organized. The Friday Claire was supposed to fly out, I got a call from Daniel at 2 in the afternoon. His voice had that carefully constructed tension that I now recognize for exactly what it was, rehearsed panic. He said there was a crisis at work. A major client had pulled out of a deal and his boss needed everyone in the office that weekend for an emergency strategy session. He said he was devastated. He said he'd tried everything. He said he had no choice. He asked me if I could come watch the kids so Claire wouldn't miss her flight. That part he said pointedly, like he was being generous. Like he was still trying to make the trip happen despite the disaster that had befallen him. I drove over. I got there to find Claire standing in the kitchen in her coat with her suitcase by the door, and she had been crying. Not actively crying, the kind of face you have after you've been crying, where everything is slightly swollen and slightly hollow at the same time. Oscar and Lily were in the living room watching television. The atmosphere in that house was something I can only describe as artificially pressurized, like the air before a storm when everything goes very still. Claire was still going. That was clear. Daniel was at the kitchen table on his laptop, already deep in whatever emergency theater he was performing. He barely looked up when I came in. I kissed Claire on the cheek, told her to go have an incredible time, helped her get her bag to the door, and watched her drive away. Then I settled in with the kids, made them dinner, got them bathed and into bed, and sat down on the couch with a book. At about 9 o'clock that night, Oscar padded out of his bedroom and asked me to get him a glass of water. I walked him back to his room, tucked him in again, and on my way back down the hallway I passed the open door of Daniel's home office. He was inside. He was not on a work call. He was not staring at spreadsheets or crisis documents or anything that looked remotely like a professional emergency. He was watching a football game with a beer in his hand, feet up on his desk, completely relaxed, completely at ease. The picture of a man enjoying a quiet evening alone. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. He didn't notice me at first. When he finally looked up, there was a fraction of a second, just a fraction, where I saw something real cross his face. Not guilt. Exactly. More like the specific expression of someone who has been caught but is already calculating whether they can talk their way out of it. "Hey," he said, as if nothing was happening. I asked him about the work emergency. He said it had been resolved earlier than expected. I asked him why he hadn't called Claire to tell her that. He said he figured she was already on the plane and it wasn't worth disrupting her now. And that's when it clicked. All of it. Completely, like tumblers in a lock. He hadn't called her because if he called her, she might turn around. And if she turned around, she wouldn't go and the trip would be over. But if the crisis was resolved after she'd already left, he couldn't be blamed. She'd have her trip, technically, and he'd get his weekend, and nothing would have to be examined too closely. It was so neat, so calculated, and it assumed correctly that Claire would accept whatever explanation she was given when she came home and be grateful that everything had worked out. What it didn't account for was me standing in the doorway. I sat down across from him and I told him what I thought I had just understood. I kept my voice very level. I wasn't angry in the explosive sense. I was angry in the cold, quiet sense that I think is actually scarier. I asked him directly whether he had fabricated the work emergency to make Claire's departure difficult enough that she might consider canceling. He denied it. I told him what I had seen in his face in that first second. He denied it again. Then I told him that whether or not he ever admitted it to me, I knew what I had seen, and more importantly, I knew the pattern I was now recognizing in hindsight, the 2 years of small comments, The careful cultivation of anxiety around the trip. The perfectly timed crisis that resolved itself the moment she was safely gone. He told me I was overreacting. He told me I'd always been too sensitive. He told me I didn't understand the pressures of being married with 2 kids and a demanding job. He said all the things people say when they want to make you feel like your perception is the problem and not their behavior. I said one more thing before I went back to the couch. I told him that Claire deserved better than someone who would spend 2 years quietly dismantling her excitement about 4 days in Lisbon. He didn't respond. I didn't wait for him to. Claire came home Sunday evening. She looked rested and happy in a way I hadn't seen in a long time, the kind of reset that only comes from genuine time away from the daily weight of your own life. She hugged the kids for a long time. She brought them little gifts from the airport. She was glowing, genuinely, and it was beautiful to see. I pulled her aside before I left and I made a choice. I told her that the work emergency had resolved itself Friday evening before she'd even landed. I didn't editorialize. I didn't tell her what I thought it meant. I just told her the fact that Daniel had been watching football by 9 o'clock, that the crisis had apparently dissolved the moment she drove away, and that he hadn't called her because, in his words, she was already on the plane. She didn't react the way I expected. There was no explosion. There was no immediate burst of anger or tears. She just went very quiet. Her face did something complicated and still, and she looked at me for a long moment in a way that made me think this was not entirely new information, not the specifics, but the shape of it. Like she'd been adding things up for a while and I had just handed her one more number. She said, quietly, "Thank you for telling me. That was it." She went back inside. I drove home. In the weeks that followed, I watched Daniel behave as though nothing had happened because as far as he knew, nothing had. Claire never confronted him. Their life at home looked, from his vantage point, completely unchanged. He'd gotten away with it. He was pleasant and normal at family dinners, the same Daniel he'd always been. And if he thought about what had happened at all, I suspect he filed it under resolved and moved on, but I started noticing things in Claire that hadn't been there before. She was quieter around him. Not cold, not hostile, just quieter in the way of someone who has decided to become a careful observer rather than a participant. She started making a lot of calls from the car. She started mentioning, casually, a friend from work who had recently gone through a divorce and how the process had been less complicated than expected. She started asking me questions, practical, logistical questions, framed as hypothetical, about things like apartment rental prices in our area and whether I knew any good family lawyers. It was the last one that made my stomach drop. I didn't ask her directly. I just told her that whatever she needed, whenever she needed it, I was there. No judgment, no pressure, no advice she hadn't asked for. She squeezed my hand and said, "I know." About 6 weeks ago, she called me on a Tuesday night and asked if we could meet for coffee. We sat in a corner booth at a quiet place near her office, and she told me. She had spoken to a lawyer. She had a plan. She was going to leave Daniel, and she was doing it carefully and quietly and on her own timeline, and she wasn't ready for him to know yet. She needed to have certain things in order first: financial documents, conversations with her friends. A clear picture of what custody might look like. For Oscar and Lily, she was methodical about it in a way that told me she'd been thinking about this for longer than just the 8 weeks since the trip. She said the Portugal thing wasn't the reason. She said it was the moment she stopped pretending the reasons didn't exist. There's a difference, she told me, between a marriage that hits a rough patch and a marriage where one person has spent years making the other person smaller and then acting confused about why they seem smaller. She said she had spent a long time trying to figure out which kind of marriage she was in, and Portugal had answered the question. She asked me how I felt about all of it. It was a generous thing to ask. Most people in her position would be too consumed by their own situation to consider how the fallout would affect someone else. I told her the truth. I told her it broke something in me to know that my brother was capable of what he'd done. I told her I loved Daniel, but loving someone doesn't mean pretending they haven't caused harm. I told her that my loyalty was to what was right and that what she was doing, protecting herself, protecting her children, moving forward with clarity and intention was right. She cried a little. I did too. Then we ordered more coffee and talked for another 2 hours about everything and nothing, the way women do when they're supporting each other through something big. Daniel has no idea. That's the part that keeps hitting me in waves when I'm in the middle of an ordinary moment, washing dishes, driving to work, making lunch. My brother is going about his life right now, irritated about a work deadline, planning a weekend golf game with his friends, completely unaware that the walls of his marriage are coming down around him in total silence. He thinks he got away with it. He thinks the ledger is clear. He doesn't know that the woman he underestimated for years has been sitting across the breakfast table from him every morning, making quiet plans, one careful step at a time. There's something I keep thinking about, something I can't quite shake. It's the question of what exactly he thought he was protecting when he faked that emergency. His weekend, his comfort, his need to feel like the person who got to decide what happened in his own home. Because whatever it was, it cannot possibly have been worth what it's going to cost him. Not even close. The math doesn't work. A quiet weekend watching football versus your marriage. Your daily life with your kids, the respect of your sibling. The future you thought you had. There is no version of that trade that makes sense, and yet people make it. People choose small, immediate control over enormous. Long-term loss every single day because the loss feels abstract and the control feels real, and right now is always louder than later. I don't know exactly what the next few months are going to look like. Claire hasn't given me a timeline. It's not mine to know until she decides it is. I don't know what I'm going to do when Daniel eventually finds out and calls me. I don't know whether our relationship survives what's coming. Whether he'll blame me for telling Claire what I saw, whether there's enough left of who we used to be to build something on the other side of all of this. What I know is that I made the right call that Sunday evening when I told her the truth. I know that because of what I saw on her face in that coffee shop 6 weeks ago, not happiness. Exactly, but something more durable than happiness, clarity, the specific. Quiet dignity of a person who has decided to stop accepting less than they deserve. My brother is going to wake up one day soon and find out that the clock ran out while he was looking the other way. He's going to be shocked. He's going to say that she never said anything, that she never gave him a chance, that it came out of nowhere. He's going to believe that, genuinely, because people like Daniel always do. They mistake silence for acceptance. They mistake endurance for forgiveness. They mistake the absence of a fight for the absence of a feeling, but I was there that Sunday evening. I saw her face when I told her. I have sat with her at a corner table and watched her build the architecture of a different life with steady, careful hands. It didn't come out of nowhere. It came from a very long way away, gathering momentum across years of small diminishments, and it is going to arrive with the full weight of everything he refused to take seriously. I love my brother. I grieve who I thought he was. And I am not sorry for a single thing I did. Some silences protect people. Some silences just protect the person doing the harm. Learning to tell the difference, that's the thing no one warns you about when you're growing up in a small house, sharing a room, learning to have each other's backs, not blindfolds.